Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Norman Goodfellows, and welcome to Neighbarhood in Parktown North. Now, I know this part of Johannesburg pretty well. I used to live about 3 minutes down the road in Parkhurst, but this particular venue is one I don't because it's a relatively new addition and a particularly cool one. It's not just a bar, it's a listening bar, and the reason for that is inside is a whole stack of some of the coolest and most varied vinyl in the entire city. And it means when you come along, you're not sure what you're going to hear, but it's going to be something pretty awesome and often quite nostalgic. And so at the end of the show, I'll pick a few records myself that have caught my particular eye. I'm also going to be drinking some wine with a guy who's involved here, not so much with the vinyl, but more with the wine. Clive from Toasted Barrels is someone I've known for almost a decade now in the wine industry, and he represents a number of really awesome, smaller, boutique-style brands and has given them a real lease of life here in Johannesburg. So Clive a little later in the show, so too later on the show, the team from Bouchard Finlayson, and the chance to explore not just some newer releases, but together with Chris Albrecht, the winemaker, some of the older vintages, and see how the story has unfolded with one of the two big names of the Hemel and Aarde. The other big name, of course, is Hamilton Russell, and Anthony, together with Emul Ross, his winemaker, were up in Johannesburg just a few weeks ago. I caught up with them at the Sant and Sun under the guiding eye of the great Miguel Chan to not only try some wine, but tell this story and find out exactly why Hamilton Russell keeps going from strength to strength. 1995 was a pretty special year for a number of reasons in South Africa. A young democracy was just finding its feet. Is there a sense of déjà vu there? A good-looking blonde flanker led his country to a famous World Cup victory that united a nation. And then a dashing and debonair Downton Abbey type character in the Hemel and Aarde produced the first Sauvignon Blanc of what has become part of a family of some of South Africa's most loved, most respected, most successful wines. Annoyingly, 30 years later, said gentleman doesn't look a day older, and his wine has only got better. Anthony Hamilton Russell, congratulations, that's quite a landmark.
Thanks, Dan. It is special for us. And I'm proud of the fact we've only ever made one Sauvignon Blanc and one Pinotage, and no reserves, no second labels. It's got its own wine cellar now, very humble beginnings, and sold in 48 countries, and wine by the glass in some very prestigious restaurants. I would say we serve it, it doesn't serve us anymore. We've got to meet expectations. So today really is something of a Johannesburg celebration of that 30th vintage milestone for Southern Rite. But I'm celebrating it with our 44th vintage of Hamilton Russell Vineyards Pinot Noir.
Which makes for just this range of stories. Now, I think it's a good year for you to be looking at where Hamilton Russell has got to, because you're allegedly 60. It certainly doesn't look that way, but this is what we are told. You've also become a grandfather, also impossibly young, but so be it. And the chance to sit back and look at where you've got to with this wine story, and whether it is the 30 years of the Sauvignon Blanc or the 44 years of what is truly an iconic South African wine. You're not somebody who tends to shout your own story from the rooftops, but I think even you might concede that there is reason to sit back rather proudly and look back on this wine story of yours.
I mean, I love hearing that, but I think in the wine industry you get this slow creep of escalating humility, because there's so much that's thrown at you and you realize you're only as good as your last vintage. We had the great storm of September 2023, 24th and 25th of September, which gave us a real kick. We lost a lot to fire in 2019. The world economy affects us in ways with exchange rates. The political environment in South Africa adds layers of risk. So we never wake up and feel ever that we've arrived. We always wake up feeling we're going to have to continue to work for our quest. But the thing that has changed in me is I've realized this wine, our wines, mean so much to so many people internationally that it's no longer ours to play with. It might be my business, but it's not mine to play with. It's a responsibility. And that, again, just adds to this ongoing sense of humility. That plus old age.
The responsibility, I think, whether you like it or not, is beyond just the fans, of whom you have many, but also the broader industry. And if I look at a trip I did a little earlier this year to Hong Kong, your outstanding winemaker Emul joined me on a show where the manager of the hotel had a wine he was very excited about sharing with me, and it was a bottle of Hamilton Russell Chardonnay. And if you go back the 4.5 decades or thereabouts, you've not just been making your own wine, but you've been making really important strides for how South Africa, Hemel and Aarde specifically, but South Africa more broadly, understands what our potential is in delivering great Chardonnay and Pinot Noir from South Africa.
Well, again, that's lovely to hear. I think of our success really as a happy accident of geography that we had the good sense to listen to. So our aesthetic from day one was much more in that classic styling, you know, the great European styled wines, aesthetically at least. We are quintessentially African. And we, I suppose, had the good sense not to try and deviate from that and follow the fashion of the times for bigger, bolder, more fruit-forward styles. We've always had this slightly more classic, refined, understated expression. And as things have moved forward over time, we find that resonates with the kinds of people, the sommeliers, the customers, the consumers that are prepared to spend decent amounts of money on fine wine.
As you look back at the very, very start, when you first started getting your hands and feet and a few glasses dirty, the vision then for what you thought the Chardonnay and Pinot Noir in particular could become versus where you find it today, how big is that gap?
I think our internal ambition for where we want to end up, you know, we would reference some of the great Burgundies and we would realize that it's multi-generational until we get that acclaim internationally. But we're creeping towards it. I'm always reassured to realize that our first wine sold in America as sanctions were lifted was $5.99. That same wine is now $55. So given time, we will be placed where we deserve in the world of fine wine. And I think that applies not just to us, but all the wonderful high-end wines being made in South Africa today. We still carry a country of origin discount of sorts, and that is slowly being chipped away at and eroded as more and more great wines emerge from our industry.
If Jane Austen had placed Mr. Darcy in wine territory, I think he'd be sitting next to me right now. But that image is only part of what you do. You've also got to deliver terrific wine. You play a guiding role in that. But you've also got a young, roguish gentleman who's been doing some pretty special stuff in the cellar. Tell me about the impact that Emul has had over the last few years.
Well, I think Emul's biggest impact has been not letting his ego get in the way of our expression of site and soil. So his biggest impact has almost been what I would call an invisible impact. And I see him leading us in a direction of more purity, balance. I won't say cleanliness because the wines were never unclean, but you just get the sense of this beautiful purity, balance, and an expression without either overripeness, overfruitedness, overwoodedness. It's just, there's something seamless and beautiful about the wines he's made, and with an incredibly high attention to detail. And he's wonderful to work with. I mean, any enterprise is a team effort. And Emul is so fully integrated. You can see how well he gets on with all of us and how well we get on with him. So he's been an absolute joy, and he's celebrated, that's another celebration. The 24th vintage of Sauvignon Blanc is also his 10th vintage with us.
Well, we raise a glass to him for being a splendid winemaker and one of a number in the valley who have given us interpretations of varietals beyond just the Chardonnay and the Pinot Noir, which we normally associate with the Hemel and Aarde Valley. But I must ask you about those two in particular. They are the headline acts. If you could pick a Chardonnay and a Pinot Noir from over the years, a particular vintage of each, that for some reason they were either mind-blowingly good or that was just a year that something really special happened, what would those two wines be?
Well, it's a very difficult question to ask. I think parents tend to get obsessed with the latest child. And I also think that if you're not broadly improving in the way you want to improve over time, you're moving backwards rapidly. So I would tend to gravitate towards our more recent vintages. And I like the ones that often aren't well received on release. So I'm a big fan of 2022 Pinot Noir, for example, which was possibly a little over-muscular structured, quiet, and unshowy on release, but it's really looking good now. 2001 was a great vintage if one wants to go back to another winemaker at the time. And for Chardonnay, the 21 I have to respect because of the accolades it's received worldwide. But on release was not my favorite. I again preferred the 2022, which is more austere and linear. That's an evasive answer. I'm sorry.
Wonderfully diplomatic. I'll give you one you can answer a lot easier then to wrap up. You talk about parents being very proud of children. Whatever Chardonnay and whatever Pinot Noir we select, if we're sitting down for a meal, I suspect there might be a restaurant in Stellenbosch that would be your first pick at the moment.
Yes, my daughter and her husband's restaurant, Raycart's at Longridge. And what I like about that, again, there's no ego in the food, as we like to believe there's no real ego in our wines. Great ingredients, not a massive list, and the flavorings are subtle and not overdone, and the plate isn't overdone. It's just good, very talented, simple cooking, done beautifully with the best of ingredients and not too ornate. And I greatly enjoy eating there. And there are not many places you can sit surrounded by herb gardens and flower beds looking at Table Mountain high up on a hill. I think it's beautiful.
And in your case, surrounded by the next two generations of Hamilton Russells, which
Correct.
completes the experience. Anthony, it's always lovely celebrating with you, but this year feels particularly celebratory. Some great wine as always, but just a fantastic story. And thank you for sharing it with us.
Thanks, Dan. Always nice chatting to you.
So normally when you're having some wine with one of the great winemakers of the Hemel and Aarde Valley, you'd expect to be drinking Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, or a combination thereof. But our first point of celebration today is neither of those grapes, but the 24th edition and your 10th of some Sauvignon Blanc. And I suspect, Emul, that for you as a winemaker, yes, you have these great Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs, which you've done so well, but to have that broader spectrum with which to play around in probably just gives you a little bit more fun, a little bit more excitement as a winemaker.
Yes, it's Sauvignon Blanc's the grape that keeps us nice and busy during harvest, and yes, our 30th vintage of Southern White Sauvignon. So it's a variety that many winemakers sort of tease and joke about, but it's for us something we take quite seriously, and we've got fantastic fruit sources, so it's always quite fun, and we got a slightly different approach to making some of the pockets that we get from, so it's fun. Keeps me off the street.
There's obviously a lot of commercial motivation in making a Sauvignon Blanc in South Africa, but I also know you and Anthony well enough to know that you're not just going to stick something in the bottle because it's going to make you some money. You've got to create a Sauvignon Blanc that is going to speak to who you are as winemakers and the integrity of the brand. And
yes.
I think you've nailed that 10 years running for yourself.
Well, it's nice to hear that. I think we stylistically go for wines that are less fruit forward and more sort of nicer to drink on the palate. And it's been a learning curve for me. I came from different cellars where almost every time Sauvignon Blanc was treated differently. So I think I could learn from them, and then with Southern Right really play around nicely and get the best wine out of the fruit that we get from. And we've got some fantastic fruit sources now, long-term contracts, so it's exciting. Get to know the vintages a bit better and get better at handling what the vintages throw at us.
Alongside your Pinotage, it forms that Southern Right brand, which is done really well. But we do know what the royalty in the house is, and it is that Hamilton Russell Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. You've had a decade now to really get your head around what you want to be doing with these wines. Is there still, at the start of each vintage, a sense of, oh, hang on, this is Hamilton Russell I'm making, I've got to get it just right?
I think the day that I lose that, I need to leave. Yes, there's butterflies before every vintage. But it's nice now to get to know the place. I think it's very difficult with both Chardonnay and Pinot, and in the area that we're in. I don't think you really get to know a property in 5 years unless you've had very easy vintages maybe. It sort of takes, I think, 10 years to really get to know the different pockets and how they react to certain vintages. And I like to think that our team's getting there now, and it is still Hamilton Russell, but so yes, there's a bit of pre-match tension every season, but it's part of the fun, you know. It keeps us humble, and it's what I love about winemaking.
I think I definitely agree with the 10-year thought, because it wasn't until I turned 10 that I really started getting my palate around some of these more complex wines, which I'm now sharing. And I'm looking around here at the Sandeck at Southern Sun, Miguel Chan, headlining some pretty important people in the South African wine industry. And here they all are, excitedly pouring your wine, drinking your wine, raising glasses with your wine. I know that most winemakers do their best to be incredibly humble and cool and not let this bother you at all, but it must still be a pretty awesome feeling when you see people who make big wine decisions in South Africa pouring a glass of your wine and going, yep, this is the stuff. Yeah,
no, you know, Joburg's always been fantastic. I think the turnout today is roughly 130 or 150 people, and it's fantastic to as a winemaker to see people taking their time out of their day to come and taste the wines, and to see the excitement in most of their faces about the wines, and that's what it's all about for me. It's for me the best part of winemaking is seeing the commitment to the brand that people have, and the joy that it can give them. You know, it's fantastic.
Well, there's going to be a lot more joy, because you said 130 to 150. We gave away 300 tickets on Dan Really Likes Wine, which I forgot to mention to you. Cool. But I'm sure you'll be fine with that as people sweep in to try this wine. And they will find, I'm sure, a particular favourite, something that really speaks to them. I did ask Anthony this question. He gave me a kind of Nas Buerta on rugby answer, where he said a lot without actually giving me a proper opinion. On the other hand, indeed, Emul, which of the wines that you've made, is there one, and not necessarily one of the Chardonnays or Pinot Noirs, but is there a particular wine, whether it was early in the career, whether it was, I think I've got my head around this vineyard, was there a particular one that said to you, know what, this is a really special moment in my winemaking career?
We're showing the 2015 Ashbourne Pinotage, which was my first Pinotage that I made. 15 was my first vintage, and that's showing incredibly well, and I think that's probably my favorite wine today. The 22 is also showing. We've just released the 22, and that's also showing beautifully. So I think if I had to pick a wine of the day, for me, it would be the two Ashbourne Pinotages.
All right. Well, in that case, I'm off to go and pour a large glass and try and sneak a few into my cameraman's bag as well. It was lovely hanging out with you, but it's always lovely drinking wine as well. Keep making more of it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cheers. So that's the Hamilton Russell story. Anthony and Emul together combining for a really fun owner-winemaker combination and dynamic, and going beyond just the wines you might expect from the Hemel and Aarde, that Sauvignon Blanc and the Pinotage they make in particular, a real highlight of what has been an enduring story of love, passion, hard work, more than a few tears, but ultimately a triumph for taking the Burgundian style of grapes plus a few others into the Hemel and Aarde and coming up trumps, which is exactly what my guest here today is at Neighbarhood. I first met him when he dragged me along to a car park in Bryanston to go and film. I think it was Gerard Holden we filmed with.
It was.
I had this random message, somebody I'd never heard of, from some company called Toasted Barrels, which sounded like it must be a front for something.
Sounded like it.
We come along and meet this giant Boris Johnson of a man. We sat, we had a splendid lunch, drank some great wine. I think that was long enough ago that we filmed something on a phone.
We really did. It was before all this.
It was indeed. So Dan Really Likes Wine has happily come a long way. But so too you, Clive, because your Toasted Barrels business has gone from maybe I can do something in wine to now one of the more established purveyors of not just wine but really good wine across Johannesburg.
That was the plan. That was the plan from onset. Essentially start a little enclave of producers that cover the length and breadth of the winelands, obviously, but obviously focusing on different forms of wine and the lesser known brands. So these are brands that you wouldn't ordinarily find in your run-of-the-mill liquor store, but bringing playful, fun wines to the everyday consumer.
How difficult was it at the start to go up to somebody and say, "Hi, I'm Clive, you've never heard of me, you've never heard of my company, you don't have a clue who I am, and I'd like to be the custodian of your brand"?
Funny enough, I think that segue from my previous life. So I've been in the industry now for 14 years. Toasted Barrels is only 7. So when I walked in, I knew I had a great rapport with a lot of the customers that were there. The only thing that I had to do is introduce myself under a different hat. Because I'm sure you'll know, before this I was at Great Domains, and before this I was with Wine Dynamics. So walking in to see customers wasn't such a difficult endeavor. It was more of seeing me in my own light, essentially.
And it's grown really quickly because the range of brands that you have, and I say brands tentatively, it's not the word I like to use, but you do have some great brands. And I think you've been part of that journey of taking people who maybe weren't terribly well known to now having something of a foothold, especially here in Johannesburg.
100%. And I think that's been the most exciting but the toughest at the same time, is bringing brands where people go, what the hell is this? To them actually eventually tasting and singing praises. And I think when I said it's exciting and scary at the same time, it's that the wines could solely be rejected, because these are wines that you have to drink and essentially create a mindset in an honest way. Because they're not brands, these aren't wineries where they'll be sold by name. It's what's in the glass that essentially holds the water.
Now, you've selected wine that you clearly like, that you feel has got a story
Absolutely.
that appeals to you, but you've got to convince other people of the same thing. And here today is a good example. You have in Neighbarhood, very clever, in Parktown North, a little space that's clearly a lot of fun. There's a lot of vinyl as you walk in. It's got a very endearing atmosphere to it, and it's got some rather good wine that you're responsible for.
100%. So I think as Toasted Barrels, we were tasked with essentially bringing the wine life to this establishment specifically. And the whole idea there is, I think it's in line with our general hope for the industry, where don't limit yourself to a list. Let the customers drink as much as possible. And the only way they can do that is through diversity. So with Neighbarhood, what we've agreed on is every 2 months, we change the entire wine list. And it might be within the same brand, the same winery or producer, but it'll be a different wine. And what that does is, one, it fosters a loyal customer to come through, but then also give them something new to try every single time. So yeah, the idea is to change the list as often as possible. And in that way, people get to play and enjoy different wines at every given moment.
And this is one of them. This is the garagee's Callan Williams.
Who's
a wonderful character whose wine journey now is a decade and counting, and growing the range as of late. Initially, this was half of her production.
Literally.
I asked you to pick a bottle of wine that struck a chord for you. Why this one?
Specifically the Cabernet Franc. So this is Bruce, which is obviously wines inspired by music that Callan makes. And usually just Hall of Great artists that feature. Cabernet Franc for me is a firm favorite. I've not been a fan of the other more known Bordeaux varietals in Merlot and Cab, but Cab Franc just strikes a chord with me. That beautiful, the beautiful herbal notes that come through, together with the cherries and berries that make up this wine, for me, are what stands out. And case in point is the vintage. 2017, which is the current vintage that's out now, is one, a delight to drink, and I think a great wine to offer to the everyday consumer. Instead of giving somebody a wine and saying, buy this wine and put it down for the next 5 years, we've done the work for you. So you drink it and it's good to drink now.
Often we talk about, well, what can we pair this with? And the answer would be food of some sort. This makes a slightly different conversation, because when you come to Neighbarhood, you can pair it with some vinyl.
You can pair it with some vinyl. So the whole idea with Neighbarhood is it's a vinyl listening bar. So what that means is you can either come in and listen to the the music that's been curated for you, so is the wine, but then you can also bring in your own vinyls and have your own little playing session for the crowd here. So if you want to be a DJ, or if you had some thoughts of being a DJ, this is where you can bring your vinyl selection and have it played here.
That's a really cool idea. It's one that works really well. Clive, thank you for showing the wine and for sharing the story, and for giving me a flashback or two, because take us back about a month or two, and you might remember one of our shows from Swartland, Jasper Wickens from Swartland, and he was pairing vinyl with wine in that cellar of his that is always rocking some pretty good music. There'll be more music played here. In fact, I might go and choose myself a couple of vinyls. In the meantime, let's take you back to the Hemel and Aarde Valley and the other of the two original big guns. Well, this time it is a chance to drop in on Bouchard Finlayson, drink some of the latest wine, but also go back a little and some vintage delight. Go back to the 1990s and the stretch of Hemel and Aarde Valley outside of Hermanus was all wildlands. The thought of wine was still very much a concept in the making. Fast forward to today and it's now home to some of the great South African brands and some of the greatest Chardonnay and Pinot Noir anywhere in the world. And leading that have been a couple of key brands. Bouchard Finlayson is one of them, and today the opportunity to go back in time, some older Chardonnay, some older Pinot Noir and a rather unique wine called the Hannibal.
My name is Chris Albrecht. I'm the winemaker at Bouchard Finlayson, and we're here in Johannesburg to celebrate 35 years of winemaking at Bouchard Finlayson. We've got a number of flights, and we're going to take a deep delve into some of the back vintages, looking how the wines have performed over various decades. The first flight is Chardonnay, 2017, 20 and 21. Just as an introduction, as Chardonnay's a large part of our business. I'm especially looking forward to seeing what this 2017 is looking like. Next will be the Galp and Peak Pinot Noir, which is the cornerstone of our business and probably the wine that Bouchard Finlayson is most well known for. Their highlights there would be either the 98 or the 2007, I think is in a wonderful window. Next up is the Tete Cuvée, our barrel selection. A very special wine going back to the 99 vintage, and then also some more recent vintages, 2017. Also have high expectations of. And then last, we're finishing off with the always interesting Hannibal blend, blend of Sangiovese, Nebbiolo, Pinot Noir, Mourvèdre, Barbera and Shiraz. Going back to the, we've got a 2009 in Magnum, which is going to be exciting, and then 2015 and some younger ones as well. So we have a lovely group of people and very excited to see what the wines have to say.
Look, I think since I started as a young sommelier in South Africa, Bouchard Finlayson has always been on my radar. Basically grew up with the wines as a young sommelier, and it's always been great wines. I mean, there's definitely been a lot of growth in the farm since Chris took over. We did a harvest with him with Chris 1 year, and you can definitely see the evolution in the wines at Bouchard Finlayson. Still at Marble, we see the Galp and Peak doing very, very well. It's like a go-to kind of Pinot, as you said, in the South African market. And the vintages going forward, basically 2021, the 19 we tasted today as well, definitely kind of village Burgundy level. The wine quality is exceptional. I think Michael Fridjar made a great example. Like when we had a tasting, we've tasted 20-year-old Pinots in South Africa. We see a lot in Burgundy, we open all the Burgundies, but I mean, quite exceptional how to see how those South African Pinots have aged, especially those from the Emul Ross region, from Bouchard Finlayson today. There's definitely still got a bit of structure. Some of them are bought more on that secondary, kind of tertiary level, but the wines are still great. They still have great acidity, and there's a lovely kind of freshness to the wine. Chardonnay South Africa is more going to that much more linear kind of Burgundian style, and I think that's what most of the winemakers are doing through in South Africa as well, is a little bit less oak, keeping the wine more linear, a bit more freshness towards the end, and that's what the customer is looking for. Biggest wine today is the 19 Tete. Or 17 Tete, sorry. 17 Tete Cuvée was really a wine that, when I closed my eyes, took me straight to Burgundy, to that kind of Pommard village in the Côte de Nuit, probably. Yeah, but very, very much Burgundian wine for me today.
No, it was like seeing a child grow up, and from a little toddler to a full-on adult, and it was just a lovely journey. Just the 99, the 05, the 07s, to what we're currently drinking now. It was a nice eye-opener. We don't do this often enough. On the wines, I see where they're going. But personally, I loved the 2020. I feel like it's where they should have kept it, but that's just my opinion. But the 21 is drinking lovely. I think I'm just a typical shoddy shard kind of girl. The Gulpin Peak, it was that was fantastic. The Hannibal was also very intriguing. Everything drank fantastic. It was a nice marriage through all of them. They synchronized. The Tete Cuvée, that was challenging, but they were fantastic.
So Bouchard Finlayson is obviously one of the first Pinot Noir Chardonnay producers in South Africa that we were introduced to. It shows my age a little bit maybe, but I remember the days of Hamilton, Russell and Bouchard Finlayson starting. So they really are trendsetters as far as, pioneering the Hemel and Aarde in the first place. But what's really nice to see is where they're going. And to see Chris's hand in the cellar, see the Chardonnays like this 2021 that I have right now, beautiful freshness in the style. The future is looking fresh for Bouchard Finlayson. So I think Chardonnay, the ABC club of anything but Chardonnay, I think is finally over. We still see some of that sort of richer, buttery sort of style Chardonnays coming through, but Bouchard Finlayson is definitely going in the direction of where the market is going and where the consumer is going. With a more refined palate, we've finally been introduced to lots of lovely Burgundies over the last few years coming into South Africa, and that means our palates are maturing. And as the South African palate matures, the style of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir that we search for is also maturing. So I think this fresher, more linear style, a little bit of, dare I say, minerality that starts coming through the wines, I think it's a great direction. And yeah, Bouchard Finlayson is definitely capturing that direction as well. The Pinot Noirs from the 19s in South Africa, that was really when we were in our starting blocks. We had a lot to learn. We've learned today as well that some of those Pinots were maybe not planted on the right rootstocks then yet. There's a lot of change that's happened over the years. But what a beautiful piece of history, and we've got to look at history to know where we're going in the future. And the wines were showing, they sort of umami flavors, and it shows their development. But what a beautiful piece of history, and we've got to, it really is showing us that the direction we're going can only be determined by looking at the past and see where we're coming from. So yeah, what a wonderful opportunity. I think that Hemel and Aarde is unique in that there's a reason why they've divided into sort of 3 appellations, because the soil types and everything is so different, and that is fantastic, and that they really sort of set the way in South Africa for understanding how we have different terroirs in such a small area. And I don't think anybody in Hemel and Aarde is trying to be Burgundy. But when you look at where Chardonnay and Pinot Noir thrive in the world, then Hemel and Aarde is definitely the best place in South Africa to go with these 2 varieties. And hats off to the Hamilton Russells and the Bouchard Finlayson team who believed in it in the 90s and started planting these 2 varieties. The 2021 Chardonnay, Mission Vale Chardonnay, really hit the spot for me today. I love where it's going. But Hannibal 2009 was a very smart wine, really pure. It shows that little bit of Italian touch to the wine with a little bit of Hemel and Aarde elegance. Beautiful wine.
So that was the Bouchard Finlayson vintage look. I've been making such great Chardonnay and Pinot Noir for so long now. What was fascinating, seeing that evolution and seeing how so many of the top wine voices in Johannesburg pick up how this train of change has worked its way through one of South Africa's iconic vineyards. That wraps us up today, but not before a little nostalgia of my own, because go back to university days, and I was arguably South Africa's worst ever DJ. And at the club I used to DJ at, we had a DJ booth, so you couldn't see what I was doing, and I used to play mixed CDs and then kind of pretend to scratch on top with a headphone. It was completely made up, but it made me some money and got me through university. DJ Dan the Man from going back 20 years. And that's an added reason, as Clive mentioned a little earlier, why Neighbarhood is just so cool. This vinyl element to it is a really fun place to come and have a glass of wine and listen to some terrific music. And the music options here are so varied. The collection of vinyl behind me is extraordinary. There's little Diana Ross and the Supremes going back a few years. Then somebody I saw in Paris last year, Madonna, the Who's That Girl soundtrack. Remember that? That was a great piece of cinema. Madonna in her early years, still going strong. Can you believe she's 66 this year? Then this was a special request from Ronaldo, my director. He's a massive ABBA fan, so there's some Super Trooper for you. Who has not sung along to Super Trooper after 4 bottles of wine late in the evening? And then just showing how widely diverse, how about a bit of a Mfundisi Ndlovu and some Zulu church music? There's just everything here, and on top of that list of everything, is the fact that some really cool wine like this Garage East Cabernet Franc. That wraps us up for today. Thanks to the team at Neighbarhood for hosting us here today, and to Clive from Toasted Barrels, plus the two great teams of Burgundian-style winemakers. Although I just think Hemel and Aarde more than does it in terms of describing who they are and what they do. The world now knows Chardonnay and Pinot Noir from the valley just outside of Hemel is absolutely world-class, and both Hamilton Russell and Bouchard Finlayson reminded us of that today. We'll see you back again next week, and look out for Callan herself from the Garage East coming up on the show soon. Until then, keep drinking and drop by the Neighborhood. Check out some vinyl, have a great glass of wine. Enjoy.